The scenery today was almost picturesque, a fertile, green haven that felt worlds apart from the barren, jagged terrain we usually trudged through. Locals moved around us, trying their best to pretend we didn't exist. Fear practically radiated off them, the kind of fear only a direct threat from the Taliban could instill. Their message had been clear: talk to the Americans, and you'll pay the price. Ahmad, our interpreter, strolled up with his trademark grin that somehow stayed intact despite the perpetual chaos of his homeland. "Doctor, good afternoon." He greeted me in his usual chipper tone. He always called me doctor, even though I'd corrected him about 100 times. "Hey, Ahmad, what's up?" I asked, matching his energy, or at least trying to. He gave an enthusiastic nod. "A villager needs help. You come, yes." He didn't wait for my answer before turning and motioning for me to follow. I glanced at Ortiz, who was lingering nearby, then shrugged. "Guess I'm on duty," I muttered before trailing after Ahmad. We approached an older man seated on the ground, his long white beard flowing down like a waterfall of age and wisdom, or stubbornness, judging by the way he eyed me. Ahmad turned to me with a reassuring smile. "I'll tell him you're a doctor who can help, okay?" "Yeah, go for it." Ahmad launched into rapid conversation with the man. I caught none of it, but eventually Ahmad turned back. He says his chest hurts and his breathing is bad. Scratching my chin, I knelt beside the man, slinging my rifle behind me. "Ask if I can examine him," I told Ahmad, who nodded and relayed the message. After a quick once-over, it didn't take a neural implant to figure out the problem. His breathing was labored, and when I checked him over, I found the real culprit, a nasty, infected wound on his foot. "All right, let him know I need to clean this up. It's going to hurt, but it's necessary." Ahmad passed along the warning, but the man pushed me away with a string of what I assumed were angry Pashto curses. "He thinks you're trying to hurt him intentionally," Ahmad explained, his brow furrowed. I sighed. "Tell him that if I don't clean the wound, it'll get worse. He could lose his leg or his life." Ahmad nodded and tried to reason with the man, but his efforts were met with more resistance. The villager hobbled off, muttering under his breath. Ahmad turned back to me with an apologetic shrug. "He thinks you will poison him. The Taliban tells these people you are bad, that you come to kill them." I watched the man limp away, feeling equal parts frustrated and helpless. "Great. Love being the villain in someone else's propaganda," I muttered before heading back to the squad. We mounted up not long after, driving westward until the mud-soaked fields forced us to abandon the vehicles. Parking the Humvees, we slogged through the muck on foot. Ahmad, ever the optimist, stuck close to me and Brooks. Ahmed's story was as familiar as it was heartbreaking. He came from a nearby town, working as a translator for the money. It wasn't a secret. He made sure everyone knew he'd quit the second the paycheck stopped. He had a family, a wife and 3 kids, and he was fully aware that his association with us painted a target on their backs. I wished I could promise to protect them, but promises like that were just cruel lies in a world like this. When we finally reached the village, the eerie silence hit me like a cold gust of wind. No bustling locals, no kids running around. Just gutted buildings and empty streets. "What the hell happened here?" Brooks asked, his voice breaking the stillness. Ahmad scratched his head. "The Taliban comes. They tell people leave or die. So, they leave or die." I frowned. Why would they clear out an entire village? Ahmad gave me a look that was half amused, half concerned. "To kill you, of course, Doctor." The dread settled in instantly. I sprinted up to Carrington, already feeling my pulse quicken. "Sarge, this is a setup. Ahmad says the Taliban scared everyone off, so they could ambush us." Carrington scanned the empty village, unimpressed. "Doesn't look like much of an ambush, document. There's no one here." Red chuckled from a few feet away. "Yeah, document ambushes usually require people."
"No, listen y insiste."
The locals didn't just vanish for fun. Carrington cut me off. "All right, everyone, mount back up." And that's when the mortars came. We scattered, scrambling for cover in the skeletal remains of houses. The explosions shook the ground, raining dirt and debris. Ahmad crouched beside me and Ortiz in a crumbling wooden shack, his expression a mix of fear and vindication. See, doctor, I told you.
Yeah, no kidding.
I shouted over the chaos, adrenaline surging as the mortar stopped and the gunfire began. The ridge loomed like a jagged scar just beyond the village, a perfect vantage point for an ambush. That's where they had holed up, using our arrival as a signal to rain fire from above. "We've got to move," Ortiz yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. No argument there. We bolted from our splintered excuse for cover and dashed into another building where the rest of the squad had taken refuge. "Where are they?" Brooks demanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. "North. On the ridge." Ortiz barked back, already setting up his smart rifle against the crumbling windowsill. The absurdity of the scene hit me. This had once been someone's dining room, complete with chipped porcelain plates and fading photos on the wall. Now it was a kill zone. Ahmad tugged at my sleeve, his wide eyes locked on the horizon. "They're moving," he shouted, pointing toward the ridge. I leaned out just enough to spot them. A squad of insurgents sprinting forward, one hauling an RPG like it was just another day at work. Tapping Ortiz, I pointed them out, and he wasted no time unleashing a hail of fire. They scrambled for cover behind jagged rocks. "Incoming." Ortiz's warning came milliseconds before the rocket hit. The explosion rocked the house, ripping apart an entire wall and sending us sprawling. The air filled with the acrid stench of smoke and the choking haze of pulverized concrete. "Everyone okay?" I screamed, my voice barely cutting through the ringing in my ears. Ahmad shot me a shaky thumbs up from his corner, the furthest from the blast. Ortiz coughed, grabbed his rifle, and darted out, Brooks and Ahmad hot on his heels. I had no choice but to follow. A desperate cry cut through the chaos. "Medic!" Instinct took over. I sprinted toward the source, dodging the lethal whisper of bullets slicing through the air. Inside a crumbling hut, I found Specialist Paul Pulaski, his hands clutching his neck where crimson seeped between his fingers. Dropping to my knees, I assessed the wound. His jugular was intact, but it was bad. Too bad for field care alone. "Stay with me, Pulaski," I muttered, slapping his face lightly to keep him conscious. Gunfire rattled outside, a grim metronome to my racing thoughts. "Get him up, Doc," someone yelled, though I couldn't place who. I looked to the doorway and caught Ahmed's gaze. Waving frantically, I beckoned him over. Without hesitation, he rushed in, and together we lifted Pulaski, hauling him out as fast as we could toward Carrington's position. Carrington was shouting orders as bullets peppered the walls like a deadly rain. Bang Bang and Killer are nearby, devils sweeping around. His eyes landed on Pulaski, and his expression darkened. "Can he make it?" "He needs evac now," I yelled back, my voice hoarse from the dust and exertion. Movement caught my eye. Across the way, Brooks waved frantically, signaling for us to move. Before I could react, Ahmad bolted.
Ahmad, no.
I shouted, my heart plummeting as I chased after him. It happened in slow motion. The crack of a rifle, the way Ahmed's body jerked and crumpled like a broken puppet. I reached him in seconds, adrenaline drowning out everything else. Grabbing his arms, I dragged him behind the nearest cover, my breath coming in ragged gasps.
Ahmad,
"Talk to me." "Doctor, it's very painful," he groaned, his voice strained but alive. I tore off his vest, my fingers trembling as I examined the wound. The round had torn through his side, narrowly missing anything vital. Relief warred with fury as I prepped a syringe. "Hold still. I need to give you something for the pain." "No," he hissed, swatting my hand away. "Bandage me. We must work." His words came through gritted teeth, and I couldn't help but mutter, "You're insane." Despite his injury, Ahmad staggered to his feet, his determination bordering on the absurd. "Your friend is hurt. Let's go," he barked before limping back toward the house. Shaking my head, I followed, wondering if sheer willpower could actually keep someone alive. Maybe, just maybe, it could. Inside the dimly lit building, Soldiers from Killer Squad were scattered, some slumped against the walls, others engaged in sporadic return fire. Ahmad collapsed beside one of them, motioning for me.
Doc.
Here, he shouted weakly. I dropped to my knees beside the soldier, checking his vitals. Weak pulse, labored breathing, blood pooling around him. A bad hit. The soldier was still out of it, but I had to do something. I ripped the fabric from his shoulder to expose the wound, grimacing at the gaping hole. My hands moved with precision, stitching him up as best I could. Wake up, soldier, I shouted, but just as I did, a shrill cry echoed through the air. Incoming, a voice shouted, and I barely had time to react. The roar of a rocket slammed into the building, sending tremors through the walls. Ahmad threw himself on top of me as the explosion rattled the entire structure, debris crashing around us, but we were mostly shielded. The soldier beside me stirred, groaning as he regained consciousness. Ahmad, you good? I asked, shaking dust from my gear. He stood slowly, brushing himself off. I cannot let you die, doctor. It would be bad. His grin was wide despite the blood soaking through his bandages. Damn it, Ahmad. You're going to get us both killed, I muttered as I adjusted his bandages, already soaked through. He waved me off, his eyes burning with a stubborn light.
Don't worry about me.
Your patience must come first, Ahmad snapped, rolling his shoulder to shake off the pain. I wasn't buying it. I grabbed him by the arm, securing him against the wall. We heard more gunfire as Bang Bang and Devil Squad pulled in to clear the area. Perfect timing, I muttered under my breath. The enemy was routed swiftly, the immediate danger subsiding, but the tension lingered. We gathered in the village for a debrief. Ahmad stood beside me, still pale but seemingly unshaken. You good, Ahmad? I asked, my voice tinged with concern. He puffed his chest proudly, though his face was visibly strained. Ahmad is strong. No bullet can stop me, he declared, but his legs buckled beneath him. Red, and I caught him, helping him back to his feet. You are one insane motherfucker, Ahmad, Red said, shaking his head in disbelief. I could only agree. Not all Americans are bad, eh? Ahmad quipped, looking at me with a smile that could light up the whole base. Taliban?
No.
Americans help. He raised his hand in a mock salute as we made our way toward the Humvee. Our platoon sergeant saw us coming, eyes narrowing as he noticed Ahmad. What the hell happened to him? He asked, pointing at the translator. He was playing medic with me, I replied, a chuckle escaping despite the chaos.
No.
Ahmad is just translator. Doctor job is yours. I don't want it. Ahmad laughed, despite the pain, shaking his head as he climbed into the Humvee. I pulled my PSG aside. Ahmad warned us about the ambush. Helped me through it, too. He's crazy, but he's no coward, I explained. My PSG gave a knowing nod. Good. I heard Alpha had a translator who was a Taliban informant. Nearly got them killed. The thought made me shudder. Instinctively, I looked at Ahmad. He caught my glance and waved enthusiastically, his trademark grin wide. Something tells me he's one of the good ones, I said, offering a small smile. Ahmad was patched up and sent to the base hospital, where the docs fixed him up as best they could. But within a week, he was back out with us, much to my dismay. You need rest, Ahmad, I warned, but he just shook his head, refusing to listen. These people need to know that we aren't their enemies, Doc, he explained, his voice filled with conviction. You can't change their minds. Maybe I can. We spent a lot of time together in the following days, hanging out whenever he was around. There was just something about him that made the dark moments seem a little brighter. His optimism was infectious, and we could all use that, especially after everything we'd been through. I remember giving him an old medic bag one night. It had a rip in it that I patched up with tape, and I filled it with bandages and basic supplies. It was my way of making him an honorary medic. His face lit up when he saw it. Wait until my wife sees this, he exclaimed. She will think I am a doctor now. I wrote his name on the bag in Sharpa, with the words, approved by Lifeline. Ahmad wore that bag proudly, and even used it once, patching up a soldier during a firefight. The idea that he could help save lives, just like us, meant the world to him. One night, as we ate our MREs, Ahmad turned to me. His eyes were soft, almost wistful. "One day, I will take my family to America, and I will visit the doctor," he said with a grin, the same gleam in his eyes as always. I laughed. "I'd love to have you over," I said, shaking my head. "You are a great healer, doctor. Not just of the body, but of the soul. You fix the broken things inside too," Ahmad said, resting his hand over my chest, his smile warm and sincere. I smiled back, though the words felt heavier than usual. "I'm just doing my job, Ahmad." He shook his head firmly. "No, you are called to greater things than a job. You are called to help these soldiers, your friends, and these people. The Taliban are no good. Maybe America is no good, but you are good." His words stayed with me long after the meal, but they would be the last I'd hear from him. Ahmad would die in an IED blast while patrolling with 3rd Platoon a few weeks later. The news hit hard. When I asked about casualties, the only one lost was Ahmad. I knew instantly it wasn't just an accident. He had known the risks, but he still stayed with us. To him, there was always hope that he could change the hearts of the people in his country, to show them a better way. It made the loss that much harder to bear. I kept a picture of him in my vest pocket, right alongside the faces of all the fallen. He was one of us. Maybe even the best of us. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even American. He was just a guy who wanted to help his people, and for that, he deserved so much more. He was definitely one of the good ones. Ahmed's death hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the loss of a translator or a comrade. It was the realization that he had been one of the few people who genuinely believed things could get better. I found myself staring at the picture of him in my vest pocket every night, just before I fell asleep. His smile had always been infectious, his optimism a bright spot in the endless darkness that seemed to swallow up everything in this godforsaken land. But the war didn't stop. It didn't care about Ahmad, about any of us. The next day, we were back out on another patrol. This time, we were moving through a narrow, rocky gorge, a perfect spot for an ambush. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the terrain. It was one of those times where you could feel something was wrong before it even happened. You couldn't explain it, but you knew the enemy was out there, watching, waiting. "Keep your heads on a swivel," Sarge warned as we moved forward, his voice low but urgent. He had a way of making even the simplest orders sound like life-or-death commands. Everyone in the squad knew that when Sarge spoke, you listened. No questions.
No hesitation.
I shifted my weight, adjusting the pack on my back. The weight of the medical supplies was familiar, comforting even, but it didn't do much for the knot in my stomach. I was thinking about Ahmad again, about how he would have been right there beside us, smiling and cracking jokes to keep the mood light. But he wasn't, and the rest of us were still here, dragging ourselves through this hell, one step at a time. The crack of a distant rifle shot broke through my thoughts, followed by the unmistakable sound of an IED detonating. The ground shook beneath my feet, and the sky seemed to explode with dust and debris. Instinct kicked in. I dropped to the ground, grabbing the nearest soldier and pulling him behind cover. We didn't need to be told what to do. We'd trained for this. The world outside of this moment didn't matter. "Medic!" someone screamed. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't need to look to know who had called me. It was Red. I'd been with him too many times, in too many close calls, to ever mistake his voice. He was always the first one to get hit, always. I scanned the area as I sprinted toward him. The dust from the explosion still hung in the air, thick and choking, and the sound of gunfire was constant, like the world itself was trying to tear itself apart. I found Red a few meters ahead, his arm bleeding profusely from a deep wound just above the elbow. "Doc, I need you," he grunted through clenched teeth, holding his arm close to his chest. I dropped to my knees beside him, quickly assessing the situation. The wound was bad. There was no time for subtlety. I ripped open his sleeve, applying pressure to the artery with one hand and grabbing my trauma kit with the other. "Stay with me, Red," I muttered, though I wasn't sure if he could hear me. His eyes were already half closed, sweat pouring down his face as his body fought against the shock. A bullet zinged past my head, but I didn't flinch. It wasn't the first time bullets had whizzed by, and it wouldn't be the last. Red's breathing was shallow, and I knew I didn't have long. I jammed a tourniquet onto his upper arm, tightening it as quickly as I could. The bleeding slowed, but it wasn't enough. God damn it, Red, don't die on me. I growled, my voice a mixture of desperation and anger. I had lost too many people already, too many good men who didn't deserve to die in this place. The blood that soaked my hands felt like a reminder of every life I had failed to save. I glanced up, searching for anyone who could help. Cartel was a few meters away, laying down suppressive fire, but he was pinned. Big Red and Specs were trying to work their way up, but there was no cover in sight. I was alone with Red in this hellhole, and that was the way it was going to stay until the rest of the squad could break through the enemy lines. Another explosion rocked the ground beneath us, sending a fresh wave of debris into the air. My stomach lurched as I continued to work on Red, trying to stabilize him. But I couldn't stop thinking about Ahmad. What would he have done? He would have cracked some joke, tried to lighten the mood. He wouldn't have let us fall apart. Doc, Red whispered, his voice hoarse. You're a hell of a medic, man. You're the best. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Shut up, Red. You're not dying today. Not on my watch. The words didn't come out the way I intended. They were forced, like I was trying to convince myself more than I was trying to convince him. But there was no time for second-guessing. Red's injuries were severe, and I could feel the weight of it, the pressure building in my chest as I tried to keep him alive. Just hang on, man. We're gonna get you out of here. Just hang on. I kept applying pressure, doing everything I could, but there was no guarantee. Not anymore. The reality of war had set in a long time ago, and every medic knew that sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, the person you were trying to save was going to die. But Red didn't. Not yet. Incoming, Cartel yelled, and a second later, the sound of a rocket filled the air. I pushed Red down, shielding him with my body as best as I could. The explosion knocked us both to the ground, but I didn't care. I had to get him out of here. I had to get him back to the medevac. It was the only thing that mattered. The rest of the squad broke through the enemy lines just in time. Cartel, Big Red, and Specs laid down enough fire to allow Sarge and me to carry Red to safety. It felt like the longest few minutes of my life as we crawled through the dirt, dragging Red by his good arm, moving in fits and starts as the enemy kept up a steady barrage. But we made it to the medevac. Red was loaded onto the helicopter, his face pale and his breathing shallow, but he was still alive. I watched as the helicopter took off, carrying him away from the chaos. I couldn't let go of the feeling that something was wrong, like I had failed, even though we'd made it out. The guilt gnawed at me. Was it too late for Ahmad? Was it too late for any of us? The war didn't stop for anything, but there were days when it felt like it should. Days when the loss of one person, whether they were a comrade, a friend, or even just a moment of hope, felt like it was too much to bear. The next few weeks blurred by in a haze of gunfire, sand, and blood. I kept thinking about Ahmad, about the way he believed so strongly in something better, something more than this. I had to remind myself that his spirit hadn't died with him, that if there was any chance at all to make this world a better place, I had to keep going. I had to keep fighting, keep saving lives. And maybe, just maybe, I could find the way back to something that wasn't all destruction and despair. But that was a long way off. For now, I had to stay focused. I had to survive. And I had to make sure the rest of the squad did too. The days after Red was medevaced were a blur of firefights and uncertainty. We kept moving, each step feeling heavier than the last. The loss of Ahmad still lingered in my mind, a constant reminder of the fragile nature of life in this hellhole. But we didn't have time for grief. We had a mission, and as long as we had breath in our lungs, we were going to see it through. Sarge's leadership was the only thing keeping us from falling apart. Every order was precise, every decision calculated with military precision. Even when it seemed like the world was coming down on us, Sarge had a way of making us feel like we were still in control. It was like he could see the bigger picture, even when all we could focus on was the next step. We moved through the valley the following morning, heading toward a suspected Taliban stronghold. Intelligence was sketchy, but we couldn't afford to sit back and wait for things to get worse. Our mission was simple: locate and eliminate the enemy threat, gather intel, and get out without getting bogged down. Easy, right? The sun beat down on us, the heat making everything feel slow and sluggish. We were a mix of exhaustion, fear, and adrenaline, each of us carrying the weight of our own demons. Red was still on my mind. I knew he was in good hands back at the field hospital, but the uncertainty of whether he would make it was a constant ache in my chest. I kept telling myself that he was tough, that he would pull through. But deep down, I wasn't sure. "Stay alert," Sarge muttered as we moved into the tree line. "We're in their backyard now. Eyes open, and don't trust anything you see." I nodded, gripping my rifle tighter. The trees ahead of us were dense, the shadows thick enough to hide anything lurking inside. My senses were on high alert, scanning every corner, every flicker of movement. But it was the silence that worried me the most. When things were quiet, that's when the danger really hit. We pushed forward, moving cautiously through the brush. The air smelled of dirt and heat, the kind of dry, suffocating air that felt like it was trying to choke the life out of you. Each step seemed like a countdown, as though we were walking into the jaws of some unseen beast. Specs, our radio operator, was up ahead, keeping an eye on comms. Big Red and Frodo were covering our six, eyes scanning for anything suspicious. Cartel stayed close to Sarge, ready to provide heavy fire support if needed.
And
I was trying to focus on keeping the squad alive, my mind constantly jumping between the present danger and the ghosts of the past. The ambush came from nowhere. One moment, the forest was eerily silent. The next, the sound of gunfire ripped through the air. It was like someone had hit the switch on an electric fence. Bullets tore through the trees, a deadly storm of lead and violence. The world exploded around us. "Contact! Contact!" Sarge yelled, his voice booming over the radio. "Everyone take cover now." We dove into the dirt, seeking shelter behind the thick trunks of the trees. My heart was racing, my breath coming in quick, shallow bursts as I tried to make sense of the chaos around me. The crack of rifle shots mixed with the thunderous boom of grenades, sending earth and debris flying. I was already on the radio, calling in air support and marking our position for extraction, but I knew we couldn't rely on that. Not yet. We had to fight our way out. "Cartel, give us some fire." Sarge barked, and Cartel didn't hesitate. His machine gun roared to life, spraying suppressive fire in the direction of the enemy. The enemy was dug in deep. We could hear the faint rustle of movement in the brush, but we couldn't see them. It was the perfect setup. They were close, too close. I could almost feel their eyes on us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I didn't have time to second-guess myself. I grabbed my med kit, moved to the closest soldier, and checked for injuries. It was Big Red. His face was pale, and his breathing was ragged. A bullet had grazed his cheek, but it wasn't the wound that concerned me. It was the way he was staring into the distance, as though he didn't know where he was. "Red, talk to me, man," I said, my voice firm. I slapped his cheek lightly, trying to snap him out of the daze. "Doc," he mumbled, blinking rapidly.
I'm Fine.
"I'm good." I could see the blood trickling from the side of his face, but it wasn't life-threatening. He was in shock, but that wasn't unusual for a guy like Red. He was tough. Tougher than most of us. I just had to get him back on his feet. I turned to check on the others. Specs was still working the radio, trying to keep the comms clear, but his face was tight with worry. Frodo had his rifle up, scanning the area for targets, his eyes sharp despite the chaos. We were still taking fire, but it was different now. The enemy wasn't moving. They were holding their ground, waiting for us to make a mistake. Sarge leaned out from behind cover, peeking down the sights of his rifle. His eyes narrowed as he adjusted his position. "Doc, Red, get to Cartel," he ordered. "He's laying down cover, but we need to push forward. We can't stay here forever." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Red by the arm, pulling him up with the help of Frodo. "Stay with me, Red," I muttered under my breath. more to myself than to him. We made our way toward Cartel, moving quickly but cautiously, using the trees for cover. The gunfire was deafening, and I had to keep reminding myself to breathe, to stay calm. But it was hard. Every step felt like it was leading us into a trap. We reached Cartel, who was still laying down suppressive fire, his machine gun spitting rounds in every direction. He didn't even look at us as we approached. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steady, calm, like this was just another day at the office. Sarge joined us a moment later, his rifle held tight in his hands. We pushed forward. "We've got no choice." Cartel grinned, that same cocky smile on his face. "Let's go then. I'm ready for some action." I could hear the adrenaline in his voice. It was a strange thing, hearing the excitement in the midst of all this madness. But it was a feeling we all shared. We had no choice but to keep moving, to keep fighting. And when the world around you is chaos, you take comfort in the fact that, for the moment, you're still alive. Sarge gave the signal, and we moved as one, pushing forward, step by step, rifle up, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Every inch of ground we gained felt like a small victory, but I knew it was just the beginning. The battle raged on, and I knew we had to keep going. There was no other choice. The valley felt like a battlefield, a maze of dirt, rock, and scattered memories. We were pushing into it, step by painful step, always aware of the danger lurking around us. Every tree felt like it might conceal an enemy sniper, every shadow a trap waiting to spring. But we couldn't stop, couldn't slow down. The mission came first, and the only way out of this mess was to push through it. "Stay tight, stay together," Sarge barked over the radio as we continued to move forward. His voice was steady, commanding, and somehow reassuring despite the chaos. It was like his calmness spread to the rest of us, keeping us grounded even in the middle of the madness. We'd been ambushed. There was no doubt about it. The enemy had planned this, waiting until we were well into the valley before striking. It was the kind of ambush designed to force a mistake. One wrong move, and we'd be done. That was what I kept telling myself, even as I gritted my teeth and pushed forward. Cartel, Big Red, Frodo, and I formed a loose perimeter around Sarge, each of us keeping our heads on a swivel, looking for any sign of movement. Specs was still on comms, eyes darting between his radio and the rest of us, making sure we stayed in touch with the outside world. Our footsteps crunched softly against the dry earth, barely audible over the distant sounds of gunfire. I could feel the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders, a constant reminder that any misstep could be fatal. The air was thick with tension, the kind of silence that felt unnatural after the barrage of gunfire that had been slamming into us moments earlier. "We're almost there," Sarge said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Stick to the plan." We hit them hard and fast, no hesitation. We nodded in unison, each of us absorbing the command like a lifeline. The plan was simple. Push forward, clear the area, find the enemy, and eliminate them before they had a chance to regroup. But as simple as it sounded, it was anything but. We were on enemy turf, with no clear idea of how many insurgents we were facing or what kind of terrain they'd set up in. I could feel the heaviness in my chest as we crept forward, every step taken with careful precision. My mind kept flashing back to the sounds of gunfire, to the chaos of the ambush that had come out of nowhere. But I had no time to dwell on that. I had a job to do. The first shot came from the left side, a single crack of a sniper rifle breaking the silence. The bullet slammed into the dirt just inches from Red, who was still trying to shake off the shock of the earlier injury. "Down," Sarge yelled as we all hit the ground, instinctively diving for cover. The sound of another shot followed, a shrill whizzing sound before the bullet impacted the tree near us, sending a cloud of wood chips into the air. Cartel was up first, machine gun in hand, scanning the tree line with that predatory look in his eyes. "Got eyes on the shooter," he shouted, moving to engage. "Negative," Sarge replied. "We hold position. No one goes anywhere until we know what we're dealing with." Cartel didn't like being held back. I could see the frustration on his face, but he knew better than to argue. He dropped back into cover, his fingers twitching near the trigger. It was clear that he wanted to take the shot, wanted to end the fight right there. But Sarge wasn't going to let that happen. He was smart, and as much as Cartel wanted to burn the enemy to the ground, Sarge knew the longer we stayed still, the more time we gave them to regroup. The silence stretched on. Every muscle in my body felt tight, like I was waiting for the next round to slam into us. I could hear the distant hum of helicopters overhead, but they were too far out of range to be of any use. We were on our own, stuck in a game of cat and mouse where every move could be our last. "I've got eyes on movement, about 200 meters out," Frodo said, his voice sharp with focus. "3 targets, maybe more." "Engage," Big Red asked, adjusting his rifle. His face was pale, but he was steady, calm despite everything. "Not yet," Sarge said, his voice low. "We don't know how many more are out there. If we go in too fast, we'll walk right into an ambush." I could hear the frustration in Sarge's voice too. We were being hunted, and every minute we sat there was another chance for the enemy to get the drop on us. But as always, Sarge was right. Rushing in without knowing where the enemy was hiding would be a mistake. We had to wait for the right moment. The minutes felt like hours as we huddled in the brush, waiting for Sarge's signal. It was the longest I'd spent in silence since the mission started, and the tension was almost unbearable. My thoughts kept drifting back to the same thing. Ahmad. The memory of him, the way he always smiled despite the danger surrounding us, was enough to keep me moving. He was gone, but he wasn't forgotten. Not by any of us. Finally, the moment came. Sarge lifted his hand, signaling us to move. "On me," he ordered, voice low but urgent. We hit them hard. "Go." I didn't think twice. I shot to my feet, rifle at the ready, and charged forward, the rest of the squad falling in behind me. The sound of our footsteps was drowned out by the roar of gunfire as Cartel unleashed a barrage of rounds, forcing the enemy to take cover. We pushed through the trees, adrenaline pumping, my mind locked into the rhythm of combat. It was a blur of movement, ducking behind trees, firing on the run, and always keeping my eyes open for the next threat. Frodo was on my left, rifle raised, eyes scanning the area with sharp focus. Big Red was just behind, his movements more sluggish from the earlier wound, but still effective. Cartel was laying down cover fire, his machine guns spitting rounds into the trees where the enemy had been spotted. I couldn't see the enemy clearly, but I could feel them all around us, watching, waiting. We were in their territory now, and they knew it better than we ever could. But we were the ones with the firepower, the training, and the will to survive. Sarge's voice cut through the chaos again, calm and commanding. "Stay sharp, stay close. They're trying to break us. Don't let it happen." We pushed forward, moving with purpose, making every shot count. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't going to let it show.
Not now.
Not when Red, not to mention the rest of the squad, was counting on me. As we advanced, I saw the first of them, a man in dark fatigues, crouched behind a large rock, aiming his rifle at Cartel. Without thinking, I raised my weapon, squeezed the trigger, and took him down. "One down," I muttered, almost to myself. But we weren't done yet. We hadn't even scratched the surface of what was waiting for us. And as the sound of enemy gunfire increased, I knew we were walking straight into the heart of their stronghold. The battle was only beginning.